It took 53 years for Samuel Peterson's promise to cost him money. The bill, delivered with a smug smile from the Homeowners Association of the Willows, came to $1,250. His crime, an unapproved 20-foot aluminum flagpole on Patriots Lane. To the HOA board, his solemn daily flag-raising ceremony was a blatant violation of Article 9, Section C, aesthetic uniformity. To Sam, a 76-year-old Air Force veteran, that simple pole was the only headstone his co-pilot, Sonny Bosco, ever got. It was a memorial forged in the fires of a B-52 crash over Vietnam, a promise whispered in wreckage that no neighborhood bylaw was going to break. The board threatened him with escalating fines and a lien against his home, expecting the quiet widower to fold like so many others had over lawn ornaments and unapproved paint colors. But they fundamentally underestimated the man, and they completely misunderstood the nature of his battle. For when a generation that values principle over procedure is pushed too far, they don't just get angry, they get creative. Inside, Sam Peterson was already dressed, not in the soft fleece or comfortable khakis favored by the other retirees in the neighborhood, but in the crisply pressed trousers and shirt of his old Air Force Class A uniform. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows and the collar, a shade lighter than it once was, but it was immaculate. At 76, Sam's movements were slower than they had been in his youth, but they retained a precision that time could not erode. Each button was fastened with practiced efficiency. Each crease in his trousers was a testament to a lifetime of discipline. He didn't look in the mirror. He knew what he'd see, a face etched with the topography of a long life, kind eyes that had seen too much, and a frame that was now more wire than wood. His wife, Mary, had always said his face was a roadmap of his heart. Since she'd passed 3 years ago, he felt the roads had gotten a little rougher. His morning ritual was not about vanity, it was about memory. At 0600 hours, he moved to the solid oak chest in the corner of his living room. He opened the lid, and the scent of cedar and thyme filled the small space. Inside, nestled in white silk, was a folded American flag. It wasn't a new nylon flag from a big box store. This one was heavy cotton, the colors deep and rich. He lifted it with a reverence typically reserved for holy relics. Outside, the air was cool and damp with dew. The grass, a perfect HOA mandated 3 inches high, was silvered in the pre-dawn light. The centerpiece of his small, neat yard was a simple 20-foot aluminum flagpole. It wasn't fancy. It was functional, anchored deep in the Carolina clay, its silver surface weathered by sun and rain. Sam walked to its base, the flag cradled in his arms. He attached the brass clips to the grommets, the click-clack of metal on metal, the only sharp sound in the quiet morning. Then, hand over hand, he began to pull the rope. The flag ascended, not quickly, but with a steady, solemn grace. It unfurled as it rose, a silent blossom of red, white, and blue against the pastel sky. When it reached the top, Sam secured the rope to the cleat with a series of deft, practiced knots. He took one step back, brought his right hand up in a crisp salute, and held it there. His eyes were fixed on the flag, but his mind was half a world and a lifetime away. In the deafening roar of a B-52 Stratofortress, the air thick with the smell of jet fuel and fear. He wasn't seeing the manicured lawns of the Willows. He was seeing the smiling 20-year-old face of Lieutenant Jimmy Sonny Bosco, a kid from Brooklyn with a love for baseball and a laugh that could cut through the tension of any mission briefing. "Sammy," Sonny's voice echoed in his memory, a ghost on the morning breeze. "Don't let 'em forget us." The salute held for a full minute. It was a promise renewed. Then his hand dropped, and he turned back to the house. The ritual was complete. Across the street from her kitchen window, Sarah Jenkins watched, a mug of tea warming her hands. A retired history teacher in her early 60s, she had been Sam's neighbor for 5 years. She'd seen the ritual countless times. At first, she thought it was a bit eccentric, perhaps a touch overly dramatic. But over time, she'd come to see it differently. There was an integrity to it, a quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to the neighborhood's obsession with appearances. While others were concerned with the approved shades of beige for their shutters, Samuel Peterson was tending to something deeper. She didn't know what it was, but she respected it. By 0800, the neighborhood was alive. Sprinklers hissed, garage doors rumbled open, and people began their day with the polite, practiced waves of suburban coexistence. Sam was in his garden, patiently weeding around his tomato plants, when he saw the golf cart. It was the official vehicle of the Willows Homeowners Association, and behind the wheel was its formidable president, Brenda Klein. Brenda, a former office manager who wielded her clipboard like a scepter, ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist and a laminated copy of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. She brought the cart to a smooth stop at the edge of Sam's driveway, her expression a mixture of forced pleasantness and bureaucratic resolve. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice bright and brittle. "Morning, Brenda," Sam replied, not getting up from his knees. He had a feeling this wasn't a social call. "I'm just doing my morning rounds," she chirped, though they both knew she was patrolling. "Everything is looking lovely. Your petunias are just wonderful this year." "Thank you." She paused, her eyes drifting pointedly from the petunias to the flagpole. "Which brings me to a small matter of compliance. It's a bit of administrative housekeeping, really." She held out a beige envelope, identical in color to the approved exterior paint palette. "We've had a few comments about unapproved structures." Sam slowly got to his feet, wiping the soil from his hands onto his trousers. He took the envelope. He didn't need to open it to know what it was. "The flagpole, Mr. Peterson," Brenda continued, her tone shifting from neighborly to official. "It's a lovely sentiment, truly, but according to the bylaws, specifically Article 9, Section C, Aesthetic Uniformity, all external structures, including flagpoles, must be from the pre-approved catalog to maintain the cohesive visual character of the community. That model, I'm afraid, isn't on the list." Sam looked from her face, set in a mask of pleasant authority, up to the flag waving gently in the morning breeze. He thought of Sonny. He thought of his promise. "It was here when I bought the house," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "And that was an oversight by the previous board, one I am now obligated to correct," Brenda said smoothly, a perfectly rehearsed line. "The letter explains everything. You have 14 days to have it removed. We have a wonderful list of approved vendors who can install a new, compliant flagpole for you. Some of them are just darling." She gave him a tight, triumphant smile, put the golf cart in gear, and purred away down the street, leaving Sam standing in his garden, holding the official decree of his desecration. He opened the envelope. The language was cold, legalistic, and impersonal. It spoke of daily fines, of non-compliance, of rules and regulations. It didn't speak of honor or memory or promises. He looked at the sterile, computer-printed words, then back up at the flag. Old Glory, Sonny's flag. A wave of profound, weary sadness washed over him, colder than the morning dew. This wasn't a fight about a pole. It was a fight for a memory. And he had a sudden, sinking feeling that it was a fight he was destined to have alone. For 2 days, the beige envelope sat on Sam's kitchen counter, a silent, mocking testament to the new battlefront in his quiet life. He'd read it a dozen times. The words never changed, never softened. Failure to comply will result in a daily fine of 50 $. It was the language of intimidation, stripped of all humanity. Sam came from a world where rules and regulations were instruments of order and safety, designed to keep men alive in the sky. These rules felt different. They felt like weapons of control. But Samuel Peterson was a man who believed in process. He believed in the chain of command. Before you fought, you talked. You followed the procedure. The HOA had a procedure, a monthly meeting, and he would follow it. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that, like everything else in the Willows, was immaculately maintained and utterly devoid of personality. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. About 15 residents were scattered amongst the uncomfortable folding chairs, their faces etched with the mild boredom that came from listening to a treasurer's report on fertilizer costs. At the head of the room, behind a long folding table, sat Brenda Klein and her 2 board members, a retired accountant named Gerald, and a woman who never spoke but nodded whenever Brenda did. Brenda ran the meeting with the brisk, no-nonsense efficiency of a drill sergeant. She moved through the agenda, minutes from the last meeting, the landscaping budget, a reminder about recycling bin placement, with a speed designed to discourage questions. Finally, she asked, "Any new business?" Her tone suggested she hoped there was none. Sam's heart hammered against his ribs. He was more comfortable in the belly of a B-52 under enemy fire than he was speaking in a public forum, but he stood up, his back straight, his hands clasped behind him. "Samuel Peterson, 112 Patriots Lane," he said, his voice clearer than he expected. Brenda's smile was a thin, painted line. "Mr. Peterson, yes? This is regarding the violation notice I received about my flagpole." "Ah, yes," Brenda said, shuffling some papers. "That falls under enforcement of existing covenants, not new business. But the board will allow you 2 minutes. She glanced pointedly at the clock on the wall. 2 minutes. 2 minutes to explain a lifetime promise. "Ma'am," Sam began, "that flagpole is not a recent addition. It was on the property when I purchased this house 5 years ago. It was on the property for the previous owner for 10 years before that. It's part of the landscape of this street." "As I explained previously," Brenda countered smoothly, "prior non-enforcement does not constitute a permanent waiver." The previous board was lax. This board is committed to the uniform and fair application of the rules that protect our property values. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "It's more than just a pole," Sam said, struggling to find the right words without laying his soul bare in this sterile room. "It's a matter of respect for the flag, for what it represents." "And we have a deep respect for the flag, Mr. Peterson," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. "That's why our approved catalog features several very tasteful, very patriotic options that are in full compliance with Article 9. We are not telling you that you cannot fly a flag. We are simply standardizing the hardware." She gave a small, dismissive shrug. "It's a simple matter of aesthetics." "It's not simple to me," Sam said, his voice dropping, a low rumble of frustration in his chest. "Your 2 minutes are up," Brenda announced, her eyes cold. "The board's decision is final. You have," she consulted her notes, "11 days remaining to comply. Next item." Sam stood there for a moment, feeling the stares of the other residents. They weren't hostile. They were just detached. This was his problem, not theirs. He was a disruption to the quiet order of their lives. He lowered himself back into his chair, the weight of his defeat heavier than any rucksack he'd ever carried. He had followed the process, and the process had crushed him. The 14-day deadline came and went. On the morning of the 15th day, the first fine was levied. Sam's ritual did not change. If anything, his salute was a fraction sharper, his gaze on the flag more intense. It was an act of silent, personal rebellion. The first fine notice arrived in the mail, another beige envelope, this one with a stark red "past due" printed on it. Sam placed it on the counter next to the first letter. Across the street, Sarah Jenkins had seen it all. She saw Sam's truck leave for the clubhouse, and she saw him return an hour later, his shoulders slumped, the determined set of his jaw gone. And she saw, with growing admiration, that the flag still flew, every single morning. She was a history teacher. She knew a thing or two about battles of principle. That afternoon, she baked a loaf of cinnamon raisin bread. She let it cool, wrapped it in a clean tea towel, and walked across the street. She found Sam in his backyard, sitting on a small bench, staring at nothing. His garden tools lay forgotten at his feet. "Sam?" she said softly. He looked up, his eyes weary. "Sarah." "I brought you something," she said, holding out the bread. The house smelled too good to keep it all to myself. A faint smile touched his lips. "Mary used to make cinnamon bread. Thank you." He took it, the warmth of the loaf seeming to pass into his hands. He set it beside him on the bench. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the buzz of a cicada and the distant laughter of children. "I saw you went to the meeting," Sarah said gently. "I take it they weren't very helpful." Sam gave a short, bitter laugh. "They gave me 2 minutes to explain why a man's promise is more important than their catalog." He shook his head. "I wasn't very convincing." "Maybe you were talking to the wrong audience," she suggested. He looked at her, his gaze searching. He saw no pity in her eyes, only genuine, compassionate curiosity. "Sam," she leaned forward slightly, "I've watched you every morning for years. I've seen the care you take. I know this isn't about stubbornness. Will you tell me why? Why is that specific pole, that specific ritual, so important?" He was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on the back of his weathered hands. The walls he had built around that memory were old and thick, but the assault from Brenda Klein's beige envelopes and the kindness in Sarah's question had created a breach. "His name was Jimmy Bosco," Sam said, his voice thick with unshed grief. "We called him Sonny. He was my co-pilot. Just a kid, really. 20 years old from Brooklyn. He hadn't even started shaving every day. Sam's eyes unfocused, looking back through the years. He was all laughter and baseball stats, kept a picture of his high school sweetheart taped to the instrument panel, said he was going to marry her the second we got home. He talked about the future like it was a fact, a place we were all guaranteed to arrive. He paused, swallowing hard. Our last mission, we took heavy fire. The whole world was just noise and smoke and falling. We were going down. In the chaos, he did his job. He did everything right. He helped me. And his last words to me, the very last thing he ever said, he yelled it over the alarms. He said, "Sammy, don't let him forget us." A single tear traced a path down Sam's wrinkled cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He died on impact. I survived. I made him a promise right there in the wreckage that I wouldn't forget, that I'd make sure no one else did either. When I came home, I put up a flagpole, and every morning since, I've raised the flag for him. It's my way of reporting for duty, my way of telling him he's not forgotten. He finally looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a profound, quiet pain. That pole? That's his memorial. That's Sonny's headstone. And she wants me to take it down for aesthetics. Sarah sat perfectly still, the cinnamon scent of the bread mingling with the weight of Sam's story. The entire petty conflict was suddenly reframed. This wasn't a grumpy old man versus a power-hungry HOA president. This was a battle for the soul of a hero. This was about a sacred promise. The sympathy in her face hardened into something else. It was the look of a history teacher who had just seen a precious monument being threatened with demolition. It was the look of a woman who had just been handed a cause. "No," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a newfound, unshakable resolve. No, they won't. Resolve, Sarah Jenkins knew from a lifetime of teaching history, was not a plan. It was fuel. Now, she needed an engine. For the rest of that afternoon, after leaving Sam with the warm loaf of bread and the heavier weight of a shared memory, her mind worked furiously. The teacher in her began outlining the problem on a yellow legal pad. Objective: protect Sam's memorial flagpole. Antagonist: Brenda Klein and the HOA board. Rigid, rule-focused, publicly pro-patriotism, but anti-inconvenience. Protagonist: Samuel Peterson, quiet, honorable, private, not a natural fighter. Key asset: the story of Sonny Bosco, emotional core, highly persuasive. Obstacles: HOA bylaws, Article 9, Sector C, neighborly apathy, Sam's reluctance to be a public figure. She circled HOA bylaws. Brenda's power didn't come from her golf cart or her clipboard. It came from that thick, spiral-bound book of rules that every homeowner received and almost no one ever read. To fight Brenda, they couldn't just appeal to emotion. They had to fight her on her own turf. They had to use the rules. And for that, Sarah knew she needed a translator. Her mind immediately went to David Chen. David and his young family had moved in 2 years ago into the larger 2-story house at the end of the cul-de-sac. He was a lawyer, though she wasn't sure what kind. She'd spoken to him a few times at the annual block party. He seemed sharp, friendly, and, most importantly, he had the weary look of a young father who was likely annoyed by the HOA's constant nitpicking over the precise location of his kid's basketball hoop. That evening, armed with her notes and a fierce sense of purpose, she called Sam. "Sam, it's Sarah. I have an idea, but it requires reinforcements. There's a young lawyer in the neighborhood, David Chen. I think we need to talk to him. Will you come with me? It's your story, after all. He needs to hear it from you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I'm not looking to make a fuss, Sarah." "This fuss found you, Sam," she countered gently. "All we're doing is finding out the rules of engagement. Please." He agreed. The next day, they walked to the Chen residence. David, a man in his late 30s with a warm smile and tired eyes, answered the door with a toddler clinging to his leg. He looked surprised to see them. "Mrs. Jenkins, Mr. Peterson, everything okay?" "We hope so, David," Sarah said. "We were wondering if we could borrow a few minutes of your professional expertise." Intrigued, David led them past a living room strewn with colorful plastic toys and into a small, tidy home office. He settled the toddler with a tablet and turned to his neighbors, all business. "What's going on?" Sarah laid out the facts, the flagpole's history, the violation notices, the daily fines, the fruitless appeal at the HOA meeting. David listened patiently, nodding, his expression one of mild professional interest. It was, on its face, a standard-issue HOA dispute. He was probably already thinking about cease and desist letters and the doctrine of waiver. Then Sarah looked at Sam. "Sam, would you tell Mr. Chen what you told me yesterday?" Sam took a deep breath. He looked not at David, but at a spot on the wall behind him, as if the memory were projected there. He told the story of Sonny Bosco again. He didn't embellish, he didn't perform, he just recounted the facts, his voice low and steady. He spoke of the kid from Brooklyn's dreams of marrying his sweetheart, and he repeated the final, desperate plea from a falling airplane. "Sammy, don't let him forget us." When he finished, the office was silent, the only sound the tinny music from the toddler's tablet in the other room. David Chen slowly leaned back in his chair. The lawyerly detachment was gone, replaced by something else. He looked at Sam, truly looked at him, not as Mr. Peterson from down the street, but as a man who had carried a sacred burden for over 50 years. "They're fining you for that?" David asked, his voice quiet with disbelief. $50 a day, Sam confirmed. David shook his head, a flicker of anger in his eyes. "No, I'm sorry, but that's obscene." He ran a hand through his hair. "This isn't about property values. This is a bully picking on the wrong guy." He leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. "Okay, forget writing letters. Brenda Klein will just shred them. We're not going to ask for an exception. We're going to change the law." He stood up and pulled a thick, spiral-bound book from his shelf. It was a copy of the Willow's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. "She loves to quote the rules at people," David said, a grim smile on his face. "Let's see what they really say." For the next hour, David became a man possessed, his fingers flying across the pages, muttering legal jargon to himself. Sam and Sarah sat in silence, watching the engine they had been looking for roar to life. "Aha!" David finally exclaimed, jabbing a finger at a page. "Here we go, Article 15, Amendments." He read aloud. "These covenants may be amended at any time by an instrument signed by not less than 67% of the lot owners." Okay, that's a high bar, but wait. He scanned further down the page. Furthermore, a special meeting of the association must be called if a petition is submitted that is signed by at least 25% of lot owners for the purpose of discussing and voting on a proposed amendment. He looked up at them, his eyes gleaming. We don't need to convince the board. We bypass them entirely. We go straight to the people. If we can get a quarter of the homeowners to sign a petition, Brenda is legally required to hold a meeting to vote on changing Article 9. The path forward was suddenly brilliantly clear. "So how do we do it?" Sarah asked, her heart thrumming with hope. "We run a campaign," David said, grabbing a legal pad of his own. "First, we draft the petition. We'll propose a new subsection, 9D. Something like, notwithstanding any other provision, professionally installed flagpoles and other discrete markers dedicated to the memory of a fallen member of the United States Armed Forces shall be exempt from the aesthetic uniformity requirements of Section C." "Next, we need the story," he continued, looking at Sarah. "My legal petition is the key, but Sam's story is what will turn it. People need to know why they're signing." Sarah nodded, her role crystallizing. She was the storyteller. That night, she didn't write a fiery polemic. She wrote a letter. In simple, heartfelt language, she told the story of her neighbor, Sam Peterson. She wrote about his quiet dignity, his daily ritual, and the 50-year-old promise to a young man named Sonny Bosco who never got to come home. She attached a clean copy of the petition David had drafted. She didn't email it to the entire neighborhood. That would feel like spam, easily deleted. Instead, she printed 10 copies. The next morning, she hand-delivered them to 10 neighbors she knew and respected. A retired nurse, a firefighter, a young couple, the man down the street who meticulously cared for his own lawn. In a short, handwritten note on each, she wrote, "I wanted you to see this first. This feels important." For a day, nothing happened. Sam continued his ritual. The fine notices continued to arrive. He stacked them neatly on his counter. Then, on the second evening, his phone rang. It was Mark, the firefighter from 2 blocks over. "Sam, Mark Jeffries, I just read Sarah's letter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want you to know I'm signing that petition, and my wife is too. What you're doing, you just keep doing it. You hear me?" Sam stood in his quiet kitchen, the phone pressed to his ear. "Thank you, Mark. That means a lot." He hung up the phone. It was just one signature, one voice. But for the first time in weeks, the air in the room felt a little lighter. The foundation of Brenda Klein's authority was built on the silent consent of the community. And someone had just taken a brick out. Mark the firefighter's phone call was not an anomaly. It was the first drop of rain in a coming storm. The story Sarah had so carefully written began to move through the willows with a quiet, inexorable force. It wasn't a viral sensation. It was something more intimate, more powerful. It was shared over cups of coffee between neighbors, discussed in hushed tones during morning walks with dogs, and passed over fences between gardeners. The 10 letters became 20 conversations, then 50. Each person who heard the story of Sonny Bosco looked at the simple flagpole on Patriots Lane with new eyes. It was no longer a piece of non-compliant hardware. It was a landmark of honor. The petition pages, which Sarah and David had left on their respective front porches in sealed envelopes, began to return. A signature from the retired nurse, 4 from the young family at the corner, an entire cul-de-sac signed, the page delivered by a middle schooler on his bike. David Chen, the methodical lawyer, started a spreadsheet, his initial cautious optimism growing with each new entry. They were at 10%, then 15%. The community wasn't just apathetic, It was waking up. Of course, such a movement could not remain secret for long. Brenda Klein's authority was maintained by a small but loyal network of informants who believed as she did in the sanctity of the bylaws. It was inevitable that one of them would report on the subversive chatter and the circulating petition. Brenda received the news not with concern, but with fury. To her, this was not a democratic process. It was a mutiny. It was a personal attack on her leadership and the stable, orderly world she had worked so hard to construct. She immediately moved to counterattack. Her first volley was an e-blast sent from the official HOA account with the subject line, "Protecting Our Shared Investment." The email was a masterclass in passive-aggressive corporate speak. It spoke glowingly of our community's shared commitment to aesthetic excellence and how that commitment was the bedrock of our property values. It went on to warn residents about the circulation of divisive, single-issue petitions that could undermine the very standards that make the Willows a desirable place to live. It didn't mention Sam or his flagpole, but it didn't have to. The message was clear. Get back in line, or you'll cost us all money. For her second volley, she aimed directly at Sam. A certified letter arrived, requiring a signature. This one wasn't a simple notice printed on beige paper. It was on the heavy, cream-colored letterhead of a prestigious downtown law firm, the kind with a dozen names in the masthead. The language was no longer merely bureaucratic, it was menacing. It listed the accumulated fines, now totaling an astonishing $1,250, and formally stated that if the amount was not paid and the violation not rectified within 10 business days, the Homeowners Association would initiate legal proceedings to place a lien on the property at 112 Patriots Lane. This was no longer a squabble. A lien was a legal claim against his home, a black mark on the one major asset he and Mary had worked their whole lives to own outright. It was a threat designed to terrify a retiree on a fixed income into submission. That night, Sam sat at his kitchen counter, the lawyer's letter laid flat before him. The neat stack of fine notices suddenly seemed less like a symbol of defiance and more like a mountain of debt. Doubt, cold and heavy, settled in his gut. Was his promise to Sonny worth his home? Was he dragging his new friends, Sarah and David, into a fight that would hurt them, too? He looked out the window at the flag, illuminated by a small, respectful spotlight he'd installed years ago. It waved slowly, a steady, breathing presence in the dark. Don't let 'em forget us. His spine straightened. The doubt didn't vanish, but it was pushed back by a resolve that had been forged in the crucible of war. They would not break him with fear. They wanted to play by the rules? Fine. He would play by the rules. All of them. The next morning, he called David. "David, what's the legal status of a U.S. coin?" "What? Sam, are you okay?" David asked, confused. "Just answer the question, son. Is it legal tender for all debts, public and private?" "Well, yes," David said. "That's what it says on the currency. Is this about the lien?" "Sam, don't do anything rash. We can fight this in court." "I'm not going to fight it," Sam said, a new, steely calm in his voice. "I'm going to comply." The following Tuesday was the deadline. At 10 a.m., Brenda Klein was in the clubhouse office reviewing landscape bids. She looked up to see Sam Peterson standing in the doorway. Beside him, he held the handle of a small, wheeled dolly, the kind used for moving boxes. On the dolly were 5 heavy-duty canvas bank bags, the kind with drawstrings at the top. They were bulging. "Mr. Peterson," Brenda said, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What is this?" "It's my fine payment," Sam said calmly. He lifted one of the bags and placed it on her desk with a heavy, metallic thud. He untied the drawstring, and a river of gleaming copper coins poured out. Pennies, hundreds of them. $1,250, Sam announced, his voice even. "That's 125,000 pennies. It's all there. You can count it if you'd like. It is, according to the U.S. Treasury, legal tender for all debts." Brenda stared at the mountain of copper, then at the other 4 bulging sacks on the dolly, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. She was speechless. He hadn't broken a single rule. He had paid his debt on time in full. But he had done it in a way that transformed his compliance into a profound, damning act of protest. He had made her feel the literal weight of her persecution. "The flagpole remains, however," Sam said quietly. "So I imagine I'll be seeing you again next month." He gave a slight, formal nod, turned, and walked out, leaving Brenda alone with the monumental task of dealing with over 700 pounds of pennies. The story of the pennies spread through the Willows faster than any email ever could. It was the perfect David and Goliath punctuation to the ongoing saga. It was hilarious. It was brilliant. It was deeply, fundamentally American. People who had been hesitant to sign the petition, wary of getting involved, were now lining up. Brenda's attempt to crush Sam with a legal threat had backfired catastrophically, revealing her as a petty bully and cementing Sam's status as a local folk hero. That Friday evening, David Chen's phone rang. It was Sarah. "Are you looking at your spreadsheet?" she asked, a thrill in her voice. "I am," he said, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Mrs. Henderson from Elm Street just dropped hers off. We did it, Sarah." "Tell me the number, David." He took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "As of 5 minutes ago, we have signatures from 94 households. The Willows has 310 homes. That, my friend, is just over 30%. They had done it. They had crossed the threshold. The quiet, underground movement had become a voice the HOA could no longer ignore. "Brenda Klein," David said with satisfaction, "is about to have a very bad day. She has to call a special meeting." The official notice for the special meeting arrived in every mailbox in the Willows, a stark black and white document that was a far cry from Brenda Klein's usual beige stationery. It was terse, legally mandated, and radiated a palpable sense of anger. It announced a single agenda item: a vote on a homeowner-proposed amendment to Article 9 of the Association Covenants. For the first time, Brenda Klein had been forced to do something she did not want to do, and the entire neighborhood knew it. The evening of the meeting, the community clubhouse was unrecognizable. The handful of bored residents from the monthly meetings had been replaced by a throng. Every folding chair was taken. People lined the walls, their arms crossed, their expressions expectant. More crowded onto the patio, peering through the large glass doors. The air, usually stale with the scent of cleaner, was electric with anticipation. This was no longer a meeting. It was a town hall. It was a reckoning. At the head of the room, Brenda Klein sat ramrod straight, a grim, defensive fortress. Her 2 board members flanked her, looking deeply uncomfortable. When Brenda banged the gavel to call the meeting to order, the sound was swallowed by the sudden silence of more than 200 people. She began by reading the proposed amendment in a flat, disdainful voice. Then she launched into her final stand. "Before we proceed to a vote," she said, her voice tight, "the board feels it is its fiduciary duty to remind you all of what is at stake. For 15 years, the covenants of this community have created a stable, harmonious, and visually cohesive environment. That is our brand. That is our value. This amendment, proposed out of sentiment, seeks to create a loophole, an exception. And once you create one exception, where does it end? The precedent you set tonight could begin a slide that will irrevocably harm the aesthetic standards and the financial worth of every home in this room." She paused, letting her threat hang in the air. But the faces staring back at her were not fearful. They were resolute. Her arguments about property values, once so potent, now sounded hollow and petty. "The floor is now open for discussion," she conceded, her lips a thin, hard line. David Chen stood first. He held a copy of the petition, thick with signatures. He was calm, professional, and precise. "There is no loophole being proposed," he stated clearly. "This is a specific, narrowly tailored amendment created by and for the community. It was petitioned by over 30% of homeowners, far exceeding the legal requirement. This is not an attack on our standards. It is a clarification of our values. The only precedent being set tonight is that the residents of the Willows, when united, have the final say in the governance of our own neighborhood." He sat down to a ripple of firm applause. Brenda's eye twitched. "Further discussion?" Then Sarah Jenkins stood. She didn't hold any papers. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her. She looked around the room, making eye contact with the faces she knew, the firefighter, the nurse, the young parents. "Good evening, neighbors," she began, her voice warm but carrying to every corner of the room. "For the last few weeks, we've been talking a lot about a flagpole. We've talked about bylaws and amendments and property values. But I'd like to talk for a minute about what this is really about. It's about my neighbor, Sam Peterson." She nodded toward Sam, who sat in the front row, his back straight, his eyes fixed forward. "Many of you have seen Sam raise the flag every morning. Some of you, like me, may have once thought it was just an old man's quirky habit. I'm here to tell you that it's not. It is a sacred duty." And then she told them the story. She told them about a 20-year-old kid from Brooklyn named Sonny Bosco, who loved baseball, and whose picture was taped to the instrument panel of a B-52. She told them about a promise made in the smoke and wreckage of a fallen plane, half a world away. Her voice didn't waver. It was the clear, compelling voice of a teacher who knew her subject by heart. "Sam hasn't been flying that flag in defiance of our rules," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "He's been flying it in observance of a promise. That flagpole isn't a structure, it's a headstone, the only one Sonny Bosco has ever had." The room was utterly still. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. "So now we have a choice," Sarah concluded, her voice softening but gaining intensity. "What kind of community are we? Are we just a collection of houses bound together by a rule book? Or are we neighbors bound together by something more? By respect, by empathy, by a shared understanding that some things are more important than aesthetic uniformity?" The name of our board is the Homeowners Association, the HOA. Tonight, I think we should decide that HOA stands for something else. I think it should stand for honor our allegiance. Allegiance to our country, yes, but more importantly, allegiance to each other. She sat down not to applause, but to a profound, reverent silence. It was broken a moment later when Mark, the firefighter, stood up. "I vote yes on the amendment," he said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Me too," said the retired nurse. "The Chens vote yes," David said, his wife nodding beside him. One by one, people stood and voiced their support. It was a cascade, a tidal wave of community consensus that washed over Brenda Klein's crumbling authority. She looked around, stunned, seeing for the first time that she wasn't a leader. She was merely a manager whose authority had just been revoked by its true source. A formal paper ballot was taken, but the result was a foregone conclusion. The amendment to Article 9 passed 197 to 8. The result of the paper ballot was read aloud into the stunned silence, 197 to 8. The amendment had passed, but as the room broke into a wave of relieved applause, Mark, the firefighter, held up a hand for quiet. He stood, not looking at Sam, but staring directly at the head table. "This vote wasn't just about a flagpole," he said, his voice echoing with authority. "It was about leadership. It was about a board that used our money to threaten a decorated veteran over a matter of honor. Therefore, I move for a vote of no confidence in the presidency of Brenda Klein, effective immediately." A gasp went through the room. David Chen was on his feet in a second. "I second that motion." Brenda, her face pale with fury, banged the gavel. "This is out of order. It is not on the agenda." "It is now," an elderly woman called from the back. The room erupted in a chorus of "Vote! Vote! Vote!" Overwhelmed and her authority utterly shattered, Brenda watched as a simple show of hands vote was called. A forest of arms shot up in favor of her removal. When the call came for those opposed, only 2 hands were raised, those of the 2 board members sitting beside her. It was a public, undeniable, and humiliating end to her reign. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, refused to make eye contact with anyone, and walked out of the clubhouse into the darkness, stripped of her power by the very community she sought to control. In the weeks that followed, under a new HOA board with Sarah Jenkins as its president, the spirit of the Willows was reborn. Their first official act was to tear up Sam's fines and issue a formal apology. Their second was to organize a community fund, not just to let Sam's memorial stand, but to make it worthy of the man it honored. The story culminates on a bright Saturday morning. The entire neighborhood is gathered on Sam Peterson's lawn, which is now the community's unofficial heart. A magnificent new white flagpole gleams in the sun, and at its base, a bronze plaque is set in stone. A local troop of Boy and Girl Scouts serves as the honor guard. As they clip the new flag to the rope, one of the scouts, a young girl with bright, serious eyes, looks up at Sam. "Sir," she asks quietly, "is it true you were in a B-52? Sam looks down, a gentle smile touching his lips. "A long time ago, yes." "Wow," she breathes. "Thank you for your service." A lump forms in Sam's throat. He can only nod, his heart too full for words. As the flag makes its perfect, solemn journey to the top of the pole, he stands at attention, his salute crisp and steady. But this time, he is not a lonely sentinel. He is a captain surrounded by his fleet, a patriarch embraced by his family. He feels a hand slip into his. It's Sarah. On his other side, David gives him a supportive nod. After the flag is secured, Sarah reads the plaque aloud for everyone to hear. In memory of Lieutenant James Sonny Bosco, USAF, this memorial stands as a promise kept, protected, and honored by his brothers in arms and a grateful community. Honor our allegiance. Sam looks from the plaque with Sonny's name finally etched in bronze to the faces of his neighbors, his friends, and up to the flag, waving proudly against the blue Carolina sky. The promise he had carried alone for 53 years was no longer a burden. It was a beacon, and it was finally home.